Our next presenter is Emily Choy. Emily was born in Markham, Ontario. Growing up at her grandparents' cottage near Lake Simcoe inspired her passion for nature, and Emily spent most of her time fishing, catching frogs, collecting rocks and fossils, and even ran a hospital for damsel flies. Although Emily has dabbled in different areas of research, one summer on Devon Island, Nunavut, captured her interest in the Arctic. Emily is now a PhD student studying the diet and diving ability of belugas in the eastern Beaufort Sea. For her research, Emily has had the opportunity to work and live with Inuit families in the Inuvialuit settlement region of Northwest Territories. Emily is also very involved in science education and has worked part-time at the Toronto Zoo and the Canadian Museum of Nature. So please join me in welcoming Emily.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Emily Choy, and I am a second-year PhD student in the Biological Sciences Department at the University of Manitoba. So just to give you a bit of information on myself, I've dabbled in different areas of research. I started off at looking at the effects of anthropogenic stressors in aquatic ecosystems. So I looked at the effects of contaminants on the reproductive success of tree swallows, so these guys over here. I also looked at the effects of mercury in aquatic ecosystems in the St. Lawrence River, such as fish and eels. So I've looked at different areas of science, and I encourage you to do so too until you find your niche. So I didn't discover my passion for Arctic research until I did my master's on Devon Island. So Devon Island is the largest uninhabited island on Earth. So Devon Island is in Nunavut, and it's just above Baffin Island. There's a lot of cool research that goes on Devon Island. Devon Island is known as the place on Earth most like Mars. So NASA is actually there, and they do a lot of research on a crater called Houghton Crater. There have also been a lot of really neat fossil discoveries on Devon Island. So there's a scientist at the Canadian Museum of Nature named Natalia Rybczynski, and she's done a lot of research on Devon Island, and she actually found the missing link of seals and their terrestrial ancestor, which is Tuille House, right here. So about 55 million years ago, the Arctic actually was rainforest, and a lot of neat fossils have been uncovered here. Whoops. Natalia's also found prehistoric rhinoceros and rabbits on the island. Some other cool things. This structure over here, this is a Tuille House. So the Inuit are actually descendants of the Tuille. So this is actually about 1,000 years old. And the Tuille would actually follow the migration of whales from Alaska along the Canadian Arctic. And they would build their houses using the rib cage of the whales they would hunt. And they would hunt them in small canoes, which is really cool. But the research I did on Devon Island was I looked at the effects of a large seabird colony, so these are the northern fulmars, on the coastal ecosystems. So northern fulmars nest in about 40,000 individuals on the cliffs of Cape Farah, and they feed thousands of kilometers away in the North Water Polynya of Baffin Bay. So when they return to their nests on the cliffs, they actually deposit a lot of nutrients to the environment through their guano. Now, Cape Farah is pretty much a polar desert, so there's very low nutrients, except for the organisms, the ecosystem around these seabird cliffs. Now, this is one of the critters that was living next to the seabird colony. Now, it's an Arctic fox. Can anyone guess how many Arctic foxes are in this picture? Anyone see? 3? 4? Oh. 4? It's hard. Well, there are 5 Arctic foxes. Isn't that cool? They're pretty well camouflaged, as you can see. Yeah. So there was an Arctic fox mother, she's right here, who actually had a family of 9 Arctic fox kits living under a rock by the seabird colony. And what this mother would do is that whenever there was any leftover fish or a dead chick from the colony, she would basically run up and grab it for her kits. Now, Cape Verde, although it looks really nice, it's actually a very harsh environment. So I was there in July during the best time of year, but even so, the winds could reach up to 100 kilometers an hour. And we were staying in a wood cabin on Cape Verde, and when we arrived, the cabin had actually been blown 100 meters, which is pretty crazy. So during my experience on Cape Verde, I really garnered a respect for these really hardy organisms that live in very harsh environments, which led to my research on the beluga. Now, the beluga are a really neat special Arctic organism. Beluga are very social, so they live in large social pods. And the Beaufort Sea belugas that I study, there are about 40,000 of them in the Beaufort Sea. Some neat facts about belugas: their calves are actually gray, and the mothers actually produce green milk. They're very big in size. They're not the fastest swimmers. They're very slow, but they're actually extreme divers. So I'm looking at the diving ability of belugas, and the belugas of my population will dive between 400 to 600 meters, with some dives recorded at about 1,200 meters. No one knows what the purpose of these deep dives are, but we believe it's for foraging. Another cool fact: they're known as the Canaries of the sea, and they have complex vocalizations, and they actually can echolocate to find their food. So they produce sounds using their melon, which is the fat part of their head. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to play for you some of the belugas that are recorded where I work. So I work on the belugas in the Beaufort Sea, and these belugas only spend their summer in the Beaufort. So they, like other marine mammals, they have annual season migrations. So what I'm going to show you now is I've got this is a clip of some time depth recorders, so belugas that have been fit with radio tags that will show you their seasonal migrations. So it's about the summer in the Beaufort right now. And they start entering the Bering Sea in about December. Well, there's one little guy left. So the belugas are also very dependent on sea ice, and in fact, they select their habitat based on sea ice. So the largest belugas, so the big males, will select habitat that is covered in sea ice, whereas the females and their calves tend to select more coastal habitat. Therefore, that is why climate change may have a significant impact on this population. Now the work, during the summer, I spend July up on Tuille Island at hunting camps. So my research involves community-based monitoring. So basically, I work with local Inuvialuit families and community members to monitor the health of the beluga population. Now, beluga is an important traditional food. So up in the north, there is a very short growing period. There's not a lot of plants. So people have had to depend on the land and depend on meat for survival. Now, beluga and other traditional foods are actually healthier than store-bought foods. Studies have shown that beluga have very, very high levels of vitamin A, vitamin C, E, and D. And vitamin D is very important in the Arctic, particularly because during the winter, there's not a lot of daylight hours. So basically, what will happen is when a hunter has landed a beluga, me and my research team will go out and we will help the community basically haul in the beluga, and we'll basically take their measurements of the beluga. So I'm interested in diving energetics and health, so I'll look at the thickness of the blubber, and I'll also take muscle samples to look at the amount of oxygen stored in the muscle. Now, while we're doing this, the community members will start taking samples or taking tissue of the beluga that they will use for food or prepare for food. So blubber is a traditional food of the Inuit, so that's basically muktuk. And what they'll do is basically dry out the muktuk on wooden planks. And they'll also take mussel, which is called mitku, and basically smoke it. Over here, this is dry fish. That's another traditional food. So one neat thing about the Arctic is that you have 24 hours of daylight. So what do you think you do with 24 hours of daylight? Well, we would spend our time playing cards. So I would play Snert, which is an Inuvialuit game. So basically, it's a game that requires high speed and fast reflexes. Baseball, so we would play baseball. There's lots of islands where we are, so we would get everyone from all the islands to come on one, and we would play a game of baseball up until 3 in the morning. We would bead, and I'm actually wearing one of the bead necklaces I made, so we would do a lot of Inuvialuit beading. And then also, if we could find enough plywood, we would go wakeboarding in the Beaufort Sea. I'd like to thank the University of Manitoba for inviting me to do this talk, and thank you very much for your attention, and I'm open to any questions you might have. Yeah. Sorry? Green milk. Oh, I'm actually not particularly sure. I don't know if anyone has studied or looked at why belugas have green milk, because their diet is mostly fish, and depending on the population, the diet will vary. There's basically about 20 different beluga populations in Canada. And their diets all vary, but they all have green milk. So that's a good question, and that's something that I think that scientists are still unsure about. But. Anyone else have any questions?
That would be next research project of yours. No more questions? How cold was the water when you were wakeboarding?
Oh, it was maybe about 10 degrees. It was tolerable, but not for very long. You'd fall in the water, and then you'd want to get out right away. But it was actually also very shallow, so you could actually walk across the estuary to the other islands. Very, very shallow water. Any questions? Yeah. Well, I've always been interested in marine mammals and whales. They're very, very highly intelligent animals, and I just found them, particularly belugas, I liked the Arctic, obviously, and I guess, yeah, marine mammals, they're long-lived, they're very intelligent. There's not a lot, they're difficult to study, obviously, because they're in the wild, so there's not a lot known about them. And there's just so many, again, they're very intelligent. They have really cool foraging behaviors. Like I don't know if you heard of the humpback foraging behavior and how they scoop up krill. And when I was at the Museum of Nature, I learned a lot about the cachalot, the sperm whales, and how they use their spermaceti gland to help dive for squid. So I think they're just very fascinating animals, and that's basically what got me interested in whales. But they're difficult to study, which is good. But it's cool. It's a challenge, and I like that. Anything else? Okay, thank you.